the basic beginner setup, environmental setup, access, rights and roles. I'm doing two sections. The first section is going to be here on, like I said, here, environmental access, users, some of the basic setup with taxonomy, breed, species, colors, value listings like that, interface jobs, and then then we're going to go into a little bit on client setup and the external portal clients. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details of clients because that'll be covered a little more in detail when it comes to accounting in one of the later sessions, but at least talk about some of the setup around clients and some of the options there when it comes to communicating to clients. So we'll go those in two kind of sections. What I'll do is I'll go to the first section here, kind of break, ask for questions, anything, comments, things like that, and then we'll go into the client section after that. So that I'm going to jump over, and we're going to be looking through VetView predominantly here. So, uh,
And is
go
it
ahead.
possible I'm trying to get our IT support online. Is it possible that somebody can send this link to um I can send you the email address?
Hey, Christina, it's Prithvi. I just forwarded that to Al just now.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Mhm. Yeah. All right. So, as I mentioned, we're going to start off with basic user access, and how to set that up and kind of role management. So, for visual, under the navigation window, which is in the right-hand corner up there, we're going to spend a lot of our time today in that last right-hand column around the user management, the basic setup, interfaces, things like that. So today we're going to be spending most of our time here in the rightmost column. Um, We'll start first with user management. So as you know, VetView is web-based, credentials. There are four different providers for when it comes to like password and access validation. And that's going to be something that your IT department specifically will need to set up is, are we going to be using local database passwords encrypted inside of VetView's database? Are we going to use Active Directory or LDAP? We'll kind of skip over Jazz. That's something specifically different for Montreal. But SAML or CAS, which are more of your single sign-on providers. Um, Typically, the way it works, you can have more than one active. So a lot of times you'll have, say, LDAP and local passwords. The local password one is something we'd like to leave enabled in the background. You can turn it off per client, or per user, but that allows us to get in either as an admin role to help you out, or in case that say LDAP or SAML go down and are unavailable, somebody can still get into the database, access things, potentially make adjustments and let people in case of kind of an emergency, you might say. But the system does allow you to kind of have multiple authenticators or providers, it's what it's called, turned on at the same time. And we can have a separate session where we'll work with your IT department about how to configure these different providers from LDAP to SAML or CAS, depending on which ones they want to tie into. And a lot of times that's so you can use your local campus ID system to also tie in and log into VetView. But outside of that, when it comes to actual management here, so it starts out with the user management screen. It's a basic search screen here. I'll pull up my account. This is the user who's going to be using it inside of VetView, and you just want to identify them, who they are, name, cell phone, things like that. The email and cell phone are useful when it comes to client internal mail notifications. So the system can generate notifications when certain events happen. It's also, you can, if you want to use it, you can use it like an internal mail system, send each other mail inside of that view. And you can bounce that out to your external email or your cell phone as a text message if you want to. But down here in the details here, now I have hospital module turned on in my local environment. So you're going to see references to the hospital. For most of everybody on the line, this is going to be labs only. So you kind of ignore the hospital options when you see them. The first tab is the user details tab. So as an administrator in the system, you can activate accounts, you can lock accounts, and you can expire accounts. So those typically are used for, again, for if you have transient people, students coming in, residents coming in, you can lock their accounts, expire their accounts, things like that. If you do have the local password system turned on, and the system will dynamically change based on options that are turned on in the background, as an administrator, you can come here and set their password for them if in case they lose it, or maybe set an initial password, but then you can expire it, force them to log in, those kind of things. We're not going to talk about passcodes. That's another feature that's used primarily in the hospital side. So we'll kind of skip over that. Now, lab options. So one of the things that we're talking about in setting up this is that that view does support multiple labs and what we call sites. And we'll talk a little bit more detail about what that does for you. But each user can be associated to one of those sites or has to be associated to one of those sites to know what they can find. And that's useful for if you do have multiple sections that you want to separate workflows, separate privileges. That's one of your first decision points is do you want to have multiple labs to separate the people, or is it more just they're all in the same, system and they would just search based on sections or workstations in there. You can also have some other defaults here. We'll go more detail of that. These are the defaults that the users can turn on and off in their system. VetView also supports inventory, and if you're doing inventory model, then you can also associate people to inventory sections. So if they're the procurement officer and they're buying stuff and receiving it, or if maybe they're the inventory manager for a section, bacteriology, molecular, something like that, you can assign them areas of an inventory here as well that they may be responsible for or can initiate different actions in the system. The main thing here is also privileges. So these privileges are very customizable, and you can define those privileges in the sense of which buttons, which screens, maybe what actions each user can do. And you can do them one of two ways. You can either define these roles, we call them, and I'll talk about that in a second, how you define them. And or you can do it a la carte style, where you basically come through and see a list of every privilege and option in VetView and turn them on one at a time. And this is nice when you do have this someone who's kind of have a special privilege or an elevated privilege in the system, but you don't want to go through the process of creating a whole role for them just to give them one additional option potentially. So talking about that, let me jump over and we'll jump into the roles a little bit. So there is a whole screen called role management where you can open up and you can define these roles. Again, you can have as many of these as you want. And the roles serve a couple different functions. First, i.e., is access, right? Getting into the system, getting into a particular screen, but then also it can be used if you want to lock down, say, a custom report. You can use that as well. So the roles can be used for lots of different things. It's a way to group people together for privileges or access rights in the system. Once you go into one of these, you can either edit or add one. You'll see there's a lab section. There's, like I said, a hospital section here. That'll most likely be hidden if it's in a lab only installation. And then there's a common setup. You'll notice this mimics a lot of what you see here from the different screens that they have access to and or setup and what we call common data, which is data shared between hospital and lab, more fundamental things like species and breeds, things like that. And it's just a checkbox. You can go through, see them. Typically, what you're going to see is the higher level is the screen itself, the session screen. What can they do there? Can they view it? Can they update it, finalize it? Different actions inside the screen. They're kind of broken down, very granular of which buttons are on or off. Maybe can they edit or not? And again, they're going to go through, and it's mainly by the different screens there that you can turn on or off in the system. And you just go through and pick and choose what the different roles might need. Do you have an accession receiving person or a group of people who need to be able to create, but they don't need to be doing accounting stuff? Or do we have accounting things that maybe a different group can do? So you can go through and make as many or as few of these different roles as you want. Typically, we see a lot of people do like a view only, maybe a session role, maybe an accounting role there. Now, one thing I will say is you can stack these roles. So one way of approaching this is you could create, say, a sessioning role that has all the features the sessioning needs. You can create an accounting role that has all the accounting things they need. But then at the user level, you can give them both of those roles. Or if you have someone who's kind of sharing duties, they can have, say, a sessioning and accounting. So you can stack it. It's the union of the two sets. So if, it'll add those together, and when the user logs in, they would have all of both of those privileges per se on their account there. And again, easily remove them as well if you need to. And so you can again kind of stack in. So that's one of the things you can decide as a group, as a lab. or as administrator, what rights and roles does each person need or group of people you want to do there. Um, there's also the preferences here. Again, this is something that more of an admin. If you need someone has something wrong, you want to clear it out, you can get rid of those. Pharmacies, hospital, and just general notes if you want to write notes about people. So that's the basic user person, defining someone in the lab. Again, giving them access, activating it, exempting it, things like that. They don't self-register, so somebody will need to register them in the system each time. There is a mass upload if you do have groups of people who are coming in to your lab. You can also do a mass upload. So going back to the user management screen here, or search screen, there's a couple other setup types across the top up here. We do a lot of tabs. Sometimes we have setups like this kind of working through the tabs. You can define your titles, doctor, Mrs., those things, position types, full-time, hourly, it's hourly. Again, just different ways to categorize those different people, classifications, whatever might make sense, if however you might manage your people. But the one I want to show you is the mass upload. This allows you, if you do have a large group of people coming in, typically more since we're teaching institutions, if you deal with students, this is very useful where you can actually have a spreadsheet of information, username, titles, everything you see across here is what you can put in the spreadsheet, but allows you to bring in a large list of people, create their accounts very quickly in the system. So that's also something that we find useful there too. All right. So in the user management, so when people are logging in, what they should notice is kind of logging out here. Again, it's just web-based, got like online banking. You come in, the system will automatically hide and remove different things here based on what their privileges are. So if they don't have accounting, this whole little icon will go away. But there's other things they can do with that as far as and under their name here in the right-hand corner, each user can come in here and manage some of those settings. Now, you can turn this off if you want to. If you don't want people messing with their name, that's a privilege. So you could actually lock this down. We like to make it, I like to prefer it to be more open and let the users kind of manage their own information. But it's also where they can update their digital signatures. If they have more like an email signature that they can do in the system with credentials, things like that, those can be uploaded by the user. They can also update some of their user preferences here. Do they have a default lab? Do they have a default section that they'd like to use? Again, these are defaults, so that way when you go to a search screen, go to one of the lookup screens, those defaults will then be filled in for them, making it easier for them to get to what they typically are looking for. Again, just as default, they can always update it or change it at any point. There's also a couple of these that we will kind of touch base on as we get into resulting and things like that. Some of these will make more sense about what it is that they do. And then also, if you are using local passwords, it's a place for them to update their password in the system. So if it's expired or if they want to just update it at a given time, they can come here and do that as well. The system also allows you to update your buttons across the top. So as a user, may not want, again, you may not need case coordinator, you may not need accounting. You really like the newest session screen because you're in a session receiving, and that's the one you go into a lot. You can update your toolbar across the top as well in the system, and you can always reset it back to the generic standard in the system as well. So just drag and drop those around. This is all in the user preferences, user profile up under their name there, where they can set that and manage that for themselves. And don't forget to save. All right. So kind of going back, so that's kind of the general user management there. Again, we'll have IT specific or need to work with your IT specifically if depending on how to connect to your campus identity system, if that's something you're interested in doing. But that's more of a technical meeting that we do just need to set up with them specifically. But again, we can use either local passwords or tying into some campus identity system as well. So some of the common data that we also, we'll kind of jump into that first. In here, we call it the common data again, something that was shared between the hospital and lab. Again, we do have both modules in the system. Basic ones I'll kind of touch on is the primary one, taxonomy or species and breeds. So in VetView, we recognize it just species and breeds. We did not do the full taxonomy tree. There's just a big debate we didn't want to get into. So there's the three levels that we have here. So the first level is the species. So typically let's just do canine, most usually in it. And then from there you can break it down to breeds. You can have as many of these as you want. activate them, inactivate them. But then inside of the breeds, if you do want to recognize colors, so again, any one of these might have multiple different colors. You can activate, inactivate those as well. At the species level, we also have synonyms. So if you do want to have add in some of the more slang terms or synonym for a species, you can do that as well. And you can add as many of these species. Nothing's, we don't really ship it with a set breed species. We'll migrate that in from your current system, and then you can modify from there, however you want to do breeds and species. There are several different classifications you can do as well. So if you want to classify groups of animals as large animal, small animal, or maybe AVMA statistics, things like that, you can do that here as well as part of the species setup. Some of the standard codes, you'll see that in several of the setup screens. That's really if you're doing interfacing. Sometimes the codes for, say, equipment or for some third-party system, we might put that in the standard code field here. But it's not required if you're just kind of getting set up and going. And you'll see that a lot of times even at different levels, breeds, things like that in the system. Same thing's true about specimens. So specimens, again, we don't ship a preset list. It's something that we'll be migrating in from your current system. In VetView, we have kind of four levels of information that we collect at the specimen level. There's the specimen code or type, which is the primary one, right? So skin, blood, serum, things like that. Again, you fully customizable. You can, add as many as you want, inactivate the ones you don't want. We can clean that up in your migration process, as well. But then there's also concepts of containers, condition, and sites. So again, if you want to, this is where your data people will cringe sometimes when they look at these lists because sometimes in the specimen list we have people wanting to put in there, say like EDTA, which is really a container that the blood is in versus it being EDTA is the container type and it's the sample itself is truly just blood, or spun down serum, something like that. So if you want to use the containers and annotate that separately, those can be set up there. There's also conditions. So if you want to recognize that it's been, frozen or maybe it's been, degraded, things like that, you can set that there. And then site, which is, I don't really even have that set up, but that's where you could, if you wanted to, go in there and say lateral, dorsal, um, you know, um, Obex in the brain, something like that, where you're actually trying to identify, the site of that item. So like skin, you may want to say back or leg or something like that, abdomen, if you wanted to. Now, the only thing that's required when we're going in actually creating a sessions, and as we get into that part of the series later, specimen type itself is the only thing that's required. So every specimen has to have some kind of type associated with this first tab here. This is the only one that you have to have. Everything else, the container, condition, and sites are all optional information. They're helping to describe the primary specimen itself. And we also have a unit setup and sex. So these are pretty straightforward. Unit is a unit of measurement. So again, micromils, pounds, grams, ounces, anything that you want to do for as measurement there. We do separate inventory from, so these are the inventory units here. So sales units, stock units, order units, it's all talking about inventory. And then we have the laboratory units, which is for, again, for at the test level. So your some measurements there in your testing themselves. And you can toggle them on and off, which makes more sense. Again, just trying to filter out, like we're not putting in cases because that doesn't really make as much sense when you're talking about measurements inside the lab. And then also we have the sex setup, which is again your basic male female. You can put in other things like gelding and stuff like that, stallions. Those again, this is your list. It's nothing that VetView is going to try to dictate to you or is going to break anything in VetView if you do add different sexes as well in the system. And then there's coding. So coding is our standard coding mechanism we have in the vet view. For it's designed to support the SNOMED coding style. What I mean by that is that there is a relationship, there's hierarchy concepts here between, say, a site or a morphology or things like that. And then inside of each one of those codes, you can kind of annotate it down with the different, what they call axes inside SNOMED. boiling down to a single code. You can use it if you like SNOMED. You can go through the effort of putting all this in there. What that's going to do is just create ability to search for that later, and also as you're putting codes into the system and you're actually annotating as, say, a biopsy with a diagnostic code, you can then also use it as a search filter. So if you know it's going to be in the abdomen or in the brain or in the ocular system, you can do those different axes in SNOMED as subfilters as well. One of the main features I will draw your attention to is that you can create subsets, we call them. So as we know, again, shared with the hospital system, but even inside the lab, your pathology diagnosis codes may be different than, say, codes you're using in, say, bacteriology when you're trying to identify, say, maybe organisms that are being identified, things like that. You can, link these to the system in different places to help when it comes to test reporting, searchability, things like that in the system. So, and with the SNOMED, you do have that hierarchical. So, you can actually get where there's layers of these codes in the system. So you can have a very generic tumor at the top, and then break that down into all the different layers of specificity that you want in the system there. So. That's part of the SNOMED structure that we wanted to be able to support. Again, you don't have to do the SNOMED coding itself. That is optional. So if you just want to use it as a flat list, it works that way too. If you do have the coding subsets here, if you do create different sets of diagnostic codes, going back to the user profile, the user's privileges or uh, customizations, they can pick which code set is their default if they want to. So if they're, again, if you're in pathology, you've got a pathology set of diagnosis codes, they can have that as a default. All that's going to do is when they go to the diagnosing section in the system to actually annotate, let's say a necropsy or a biopsy, it just has that pre-selected for them, maybe shortlisting it down quicker to find what they're looking for. So. So some basics on that. It's pretty straightforward. I kind of went through it kind of quick because that is the easier part of the setup. Um, I'm going to jump over to the lab setup now and talk a little bit about just setting up your lab, right? And that's kind of where we're starting to start kind of putting things together here. So when defining the lab itself, again, we support multiple labs, so you can have as many of these labs you want to. Now, one of the big decision factors around separating different labs is each lab has its own client base. They're not shared. So client is a generic term, by the way, in that view. So when I say client, that's any person or entity that you are trying to represent. It could be a business, it could be an individual person, it could be the referring veterinarian. We'll talk about that in a second when it comes to how you define the different types of clients, how you can filter those or bucket those people down, but it's a generic term. At the lab level, though, a client belongs to a lab. So if you create a referring veterinarian, say in ClinPath, then that referring veterinarian would have to be created again in the diagnostic lab. So because it's separate billing systems, different separate counting systems, we do separate that by client. Now, that's where the sites, we talk about that in a second here, that's where it gives you some options about how you can subdivide people and workflow, but maybe still have a single client base. So, but again, just the big decision point here is if you have multiple client or labs, understanding that that's separated accounting, separated client bases there. But inside the lab itself, once you define the lab, again, basic name, address information, there's also emails that you're going to be putting in here for, like, say, when you were sending an accession report, what's the from email address, right? So who's sending out accession reports? Who's sending out accounting reports? You can separate the different email addresses because, again, if a client responds to one of those and it replies to it, who's going to get the reply? Is that a managed box? Is it an individual person? Things like that. There's also other options here around just some security around independent lab. Just means people can't cross over. Um, some defaults on printing comments, printing identifiers. Do you want the summary of charges on the report? A lot of these things you see in here are defaults. A lot of them you can change at the client level, but when you build the client for the first time, is that turned on or off at that level? Um, there's also there's also things like other triggers that you may want to turn on, like section level reporting, we call it. If you have a case that has pathology on it, has some claim path on it, has some molecular on it, what you can have this by turning this on, that as each section closes out all of their tests, it'll send a preliminary report out automatically. So these are these options here to do that. There's also options here for attachment. As you attach things in VetView, we don't store it in the database because that would make the database very large. But what we do is we store we will move that file into a set of directories or folders that only VetView manages. It's not made for people to go in there and get to this directory directly, but it's a place where VetView, if you upload something, it'll automatically move it into one of these folders and copy it there for you, and then put a reference in the database of where that file lives, what's the name of the file, and things like that. But we have to know where do you want to store that information in the system. We also support faxing services. So that's typically, most people are not running fax servers anymore in their own labs. This is a service that you pay for externally a lot of times now. Everything leaves VetView as an email, but what we're doing is we're emailing a faxing service. And so we just need to know what the extension of your faxing service is so that we can actually then email them what you're trying to fax out to that client. There's some other options here. We won't go into details, but you can turn off VetView's reporting or VetView's statement report if you're building an external report to VetView. And there's an interface you can turn on that goes with that that would send those out if you don't want to use the VetView report. Again, most people don't use that feature, but it's there if you needed to. There's also a mail reports email address, and that seems kind of redundant there. But what this is for is this is an internal person's email, somebody's email address, that if a client says, I need my accession reports or my invoice reports snail mailed, actually stuffed in an envelope, put in the mailbox. What the system will do is it'll actually email somebody and say, hey, this report needs to go to this person, and it'll show them the email address or the mailing address in the email to whoever you want. So that's typically an internal person and someone in the lab who is going to be responsible for actually printing off, stuffing it, and putting it in the mailbox. So that's an internal email typically there. And a couple other options here, case coordinator finalization. These are different things that you can lock down. What this is a security thing. If you want the case coordinator to be the only person to be able to finalize a case that they're associated to, you can turn that on. And then also you can get some other test level notifications for the coordinators. As again, if you had something with molecular and ClinPath, say on a necropsy, then they would get little notifications as the levels complete their test, things like that. By leaving this off, let me go back to this real quick. If you leave that off, what that means is you still can associate a case coordinator to an accession, but anybody can finalize it. There are some labs where that's just, they dictate or have other people maybe filling in or helping them manage their cases, so they don't want it to be locked down that tight. So you can decide for your lab how tight do you want your case coordinator list to be managed there. Again, some defaults when it comes to request and printing out charges or questions on when you get a request in from the portal or an external source. Do you want the print option to be turned on by default? That's what that's saying there. And then this is more for the hospital interface. If we're doing something electronically, do you want us to send the charges back to the interface or not? That's what that's referenced to. All right, so now some of the other options here, we'll go across the top here. A session setup. So in the session setup, this is where you're defining now like your session number. Again, more defaults around animal statuses, diff counters, things like that. I won't try to go through every single option here. If you have any questions, this is where when we get to that time where we're setting up and looking at your system specifically, we can go through some of these options as well. But just know some of those defaults are here. So the primary one on this page is going to be your session number. Getting that set up the way you want it. There's a lot of options around where do you want, say, the date. A lot of people like the date in their session number. Some people want the date to be before the prefix, after the prefix. There's different options there to help you so you can kind of preview what that's going to look like up here, depending on how you want that. Do you want it to be the calendar year? Do you want it to be fiscal year? A lot of options there. You can also pad out to a certain length of number if you want. You can add suffixes, things like that. Um, the other main thing I kind of draw your attention to is the clients. Going back to the clients again, As I mentioned before, you can give a client a type. Actually, you can give them multiple types, but you can give a client a type in the session when you're building the session itself. And I'll jump over there real quick to kind of give you a visual of this. Um, New session here. So when we're building in a session, we ask you for clients up here at the top. And again, it's very customizable in the sense that it allows you to have as many different people as you want and or who's required or not. And that's what that screen is letting you set up. Going back to that lab setup screen real quick here. In that setup screen, this is where you define that. And you again, you can add as many of these as you want. This list is the client type list, as we'll talk about later, is customizable as well. So you can have it, if you're doing it more like growers and producers, you can do that. You can say which ones are required or not. Who's your default bill party? There's a what we call label contact. So sometimes when you are printing out specimen labels or session labels, you want to put like say the owner's last name or owner's name on the label because there's potentially multiple contacts there, we need to know who's that label contact, we call it. Who do you, if you're printing out something on a label to stick on the bottle or stick on some paperwork, who is it that whose name do you want to be listed on the label? And that's only one, like at a bill party, you can only have one label contact there. There's just so much we can do in a label typically. You can also change the report order and report formats as well. So a lot of times you may make sense to do it like this, clinic or even owner, but when it comes to printing it out on the report, maybe you want the owner to be the on top of the list of people. It's just again, it's just how do you want your reports to look? And then also you can determine if you want it to be just their name or do you want it to be their name and address. So a lot of times in this example, RDVMs, we just want to show the RDVM's name. We really don't need the RDVM's address on the report there. And then you can set again, who's your label contact, who's your default bill party in the system. You can also have different disclaimers that you can add at the bottom of, say, patterns or at the bottom of the charging sections. There's a little disclaimer. This is rich text, so you can actually put bold, italicized bullets, things like that, if you want to add that to the different reports there. And then we also have a couple other options here. A session tags. Tags are a keyword tagging system for an accession at the accession level. It's like a diagnosis a little bit, but it's just more of a however you want to use it. Some labs use it to kind of flag sections on it. Some users, client labs like to use it for flagging research cases or maybe flagging teaching cases or control materials or again, anything you want to do to kind of tag in a session so you can quickly query for it later and get back to that session. And each session can have multiple tags associated to it. So maybe this is a good archive case, or maybe it's been sent to archives. Maybe it's again, you can have as many of these as you want to. Again, it's just tagging or flagging the case. That way, when I come back later and I want to search for an accession, I can use those tags again to find all the archives, and then you can say match one, match all, different options there to say, okay, find all the accessions that match that tag in the system. So that's what those are for. I won't go into templates fully, but just know that in VetView, when you're creating sessions, when we get into the session creation, which is another session we're going to have later, we'll talk more in detail about it. But again, going quickly, when you're going back to building your session, this is the templates we're called here, where you can have these pre-made different templates that will auto add different things, maybe change requirements. A lot of times it's around some of the reportable diseases, or maybe it's used for some of your high volume testing that you might do. And so you want to go ahead and have a lot of things pre-filled out because it's something you do commonly. So there's a lot of different uses for that, but this is where those templates live here on the lab setup screen. And again, you can add as many of those as you want, edit those attributes that go with each template. On the report setup, what this is setting up is mainly, it's called the report setup, but what that is, it's the email that goes with the report. So when you are sending out an accession report, what do you want the email to say? And so you can have a subject, you can have the body there. The accession report itself will always be an attachment to the email. We do also offer wildcards, placeholders that you can put in the subject or the body to help, kind of fill in like Dr. Smith or, whoever it is that you're sending it to or if you want to reference a session numbers or statuses in the email itself, you can do that with the little wildcards. There's an email versus fax, so you can have the fax be a little different. A lot of times the fax itself might want to be blank if you don't want a cover page. If you do want a cover page, tip most faxing services, then the email body becomes the cover page. So again, you should decide which way you want to do that. You can also do the same thing with statements, with estimates, with collection letters, and just general mail outs. You can do that, different email bodies that you can build for that in the system. Client setup. So in the client setup, this is the defaults for the client. We do support what we call price sets. So you can have different price sets based on normal client or maybe a research client. So what you're telling VetView is when I build a new client, what's the price set I should put them in to begin with, right? So if they're a normal client or internal, whatever you call it, again, this list you'll see in a second when we go to the client setup screen is customizable. So you can make as many of these different types, different price sets if you want to. Now we're talking about pricing, so it's not a client type that's independent. This is the price set types that you're setting up. We also support, and this is something I think I see is kind of going away, but I think it still exists in a lot of places where you may have what we call out of state billing. So you have one price set you use for all your internal states clients, but if they're coming from say a different state, they can have a different price set by default. That was something I seen that used to be around a lot. I think I see that going away these days, but you can still support that. And that's why we needed a default state up here. Not only does it make it quicker and easier, but that also lets you know which state is considered in-state versus which state is not. So if it doesn't equal Georgia in this example, then it's going to bump down and do this other price set down there. There's also an option when we talk about clients when it comes around accounting is do you want an invoice for every session? A lot of little invoices that you then statement once a month, or do you want just one invoice for the month? That's a per client decision. So each client, you can set that. But again, as we're building the client, if it's a new client, what do you want your default to be? That's what that's for. When it comes to billing and you start talking about aging of bills, what do you do it monthly? Do you want it to be just daily? So the idea is that do you think of it in the sense that someone's 45 days old and kind of doing it by a number of days? Or do you think of them more like 1 month old, 2 months old, and you're really thinking about it in months, not days? We're talking about aging a client's balance. We also support late fees. So if you do want to have, either a set fee if they're late, or if you want an interest-based, a percentage-based, you can do that as well. There is an automatic job you can turn on, and you can say what day of the month is that applied. And again, you can also say maybe it doesn't apply until they're 90 days over. You can decide when that kicks in. If it is percentage-based, what's the percentage rates there? There's also, just like with the sessions, you can have a prefix for your client numbers if you want to. You can also set links if you want padding to make them all the same length. You can do that as well there. And then going back to client defaults, when you're creating a client, there are different options when it comes to reports. Are they going to get an accession report? Are they going to get an accounting report? A sample receipt port, and then just a general communication or opt-out type of marketing report. You can set the defaults. And this is for new clients. As you build a client by default, what do you want it to be turned on or do you want it to be turned off? And this, again, just defaults there. Won't talk about this. This is if you're doing multiple labs, billing. It's a hospital more specific question. I'm not going to really go into that. Portal. So VetView offers a external client portal, and we'll go through that's what's going to be in the second half of today's session. But this is where you set up the portal itself, turning the portal on, kind of identifying where that portal lives, the actual URL for it. You can upload your own header files across the top of the portal to kind of brand it. There's some basic branding we'll let you do as far as the header goes there. There's also image files and stuff that you can upload there. You can also add messages like a statement on the login page. So if you want, when they hit the login page, you want to give them notices about something or information about something changing in the system. This is where you can kind of upload that HTML little block of text that then will be displayed on the login page for you. And then there's also a home button that you can have that'll take you back to your main web page as well. Also in the portal, there are different things that you may want to turn on and off, which client, again, client types. Let me log into the portal real quick, kind of so you can see what I'm talking about here. Um, so this is the client facing portal. This is the header I was talking about here. You can have your own custom header across the top. Again, whatever images, text, links you want it to do, however you want to make it kind of feel. The name of the lab will be printed there. This is that kind of block of text that you may want to have on the front there. Again, for them to be able to see as they go to log in to the system. Now, once they log in, there is different places where we show things like RDVM, potentially an owner. Well, again, if you don't call them RDVM owner, how does VetView know? And that's where this comes in. What is the client type that you want displayed in the first column and the second column of that screen there? What statuses do you want to make available? Do you show them preliminaries or do you show them addendums? You can decide. And really the decision is, do you show them things that are what we call new status before they've even started, but yet we've accepted them? Things like that. There's also a registration ability. If you want you to let your clients register on self-register, you can turn that on. If that self-registration is there, there's an email body or text that you can show them. There's an email that you can send them saying, yes, we got your registration, things like that. There's also a communication section for like a welcome letter that you can do as they register in the portal. You can have to send welcome letters or reset password letters, or I forgot my username letters there. Again, you have the wildcarding system or placeholders, we call it, where again, you can have their name put in there, maybe their email address, the actual, username or password in certain places where you need to actually show them what their username or temporary password is going to be in the email itself. So again, the communication side. The catalog. So when we start talking about the catalog, we call it, it's the test offerings that you might say. VetView has the ability that you can manage that catalog, and what's in the catalog here is the definition for it. What do you want to be the different columns of information? So again, going back over here, there's a catalog that you can have dynamically built from the VetView's test offerings or catalog setup page. And we'll talk about that again in a little more detail about how to set this up and manage this when we get into test setup. I think that's our next call later this week. I'll show you how to manage these, but the different column headers across here. Do you want test name, methods, samples? And if I double click or hit the goggles to view more details, again, you can even have more information here as well. The columns themselves are defined on that lab setup screen. You can add as many columns as you want. Some of those will be dynamically pulling from the system. Some of those may just be text fields that you're going to then fill in yourself because there's not anywhere else in the system. So again, when we get to catalog setup, you can see how that's used, but just know this is where you can come modify and you can range up or down, change the name that they see on the column header. You can also have what we call exclude. So sometimes when what we found is that when they're using the catalog screen here, um, there is a search option at the top here where you might want to say, I'm looking for, say, E. coli, right? Well, the thing is we found is that if you let them search every single column of data, they might get false hits, like especially if it's like a turnaround time or comment or something like that, where that's information you're giving them, but it's not really what you want them to search on. That's also where you can say exclude that from the search. We don't want them searching through section names potentially. You can turn that, then dictate which ones do you let them search on. There's also what we call the letter search that you saw there as well. This little letter thing across front. Maybe they're looking for something in P's or M's. Let me take E. coli out here. Right. So this little letter search here, well, we need to know when they click on a letter, what column are they searching? Again, that's what you're setting here is which one of these. We did test name as example. It's also the default sort as well. Again, just giving you more control over the catalog, how you want to present it, what kind of data do you want. There's also we call the display type here, where you can say I want it in both sections. When I say sections, list and summary. What that's talking about, this is the list view where you can see the columns that you want displayed in the list. And then when they click into it, this is the summary or the more the details of that test. You can you can decide which ones, where do you want this information to be shown? In the list only, in the summary only, or do you want it to be in both the list and the summary? Again, you can kind of control that view of the visibility there for them in the system. And the prices are dynamic, so it will automatically pick up the prices for you for the normal and out of state potentially. And again, you can have as many price sets as you want to show and pick which price set you're showing in the catalog there. We can't really tie it to the client because the client could have multiple types and or just the catalog is anonymous viewable. So what I mean by that is on the portal, if I log out here, I can't see a sessions and accounting information, but I still make the portal available. So the portal is visible anonymously, so you don't have to be logged in to get to it. Again, so kind of going back to my point is we can't always use the client logged in client's price set because it may not be known. So this is your setting the prices that you want to be shown, kind of your normal prices, you might say there. You can also turn on a lab selector or a section selector if you want to be able to let them select by, say, molecular, if you want to go that far down. There's also an accounting tab where you can set up and again, each one of the sections, each one of the buttons that across the top of the portal, you can turn on or off. So if you don't want to show accounting at all, you can just turn that off. It's also something you can do per client. This is more of a high level setup. Again, as we get into that portal setup later today, we'll talk a little bit more about turning it on and off per client. But this is just in general, if you want to use accounting or not. And then also we have the ability to do an online payment form that shows up in the portal, which will jump out to whatever your payment processor is. This is where the setup is for that here as well. And you can also say, do you want to show the complete history or only invoices? We had one school that only wanted the invoices shown. They didn't want to show anything else because it was managed outside of the system, where you can let it be the full history. Again, portal setup there. Next tab over is accounting. This one's pretty quick. This is again just a little bit about when you're doing different deposits and stuff to your business office. You can actually separate which accounts money goes into if you want to. Payment types. This is the payment types that when you're collecting a payment from a client, what do you want to recognize as the different payment? You can make as many of these as you want. If you want to actually break it down to like MasterCard versus Visa, you can do that, or you can just leave it more generic in this case. Adjustment reasons. So on the accounting screen, when you're doing adjustments to clients' accessions or client miscellaneous charges or payments, things like that, you can put the different types here. And these can be customizable, so you can have different names. What type of action element are you adjusting in the system? There's invoice setup. This is again when you're sending out your statements. Is there remit information on the statement on the invoice? There's also ability to group by. So if you want to group it by the DVM, printing order, things like that. Do you want to put a specific footer or comment on the invoice? You can do those things as well. Same thing with statement setup. This is more about the sending of the statements. So as I said earlier, you can either manually process statements every month, or you can have the system auto-generate invoices and auto-generate statements and send them out automatically for you. If you turn on the statement job, it's called, then you can say what day of the week do you want, or day of the month do you want it to go out. There's a little bit of a delay we offer. What we found is if you mass send a bunch of statements out, you can overload your email server because a lot of email servers have spam filters or spam guards on them and won't let you email out and say more than 100 a minute, something like that. So you can kind of put a little bit of a delay in between each email just so that you don't overwhelm your internal email server and get caught up in any of the spam filters. Again, do you want to auto invoice? Do you want to send your invoices with your statements? And then also, do you want to send out, certain people automatically? There's different options there. And you can see that when we get into accounting. I guess that's next week. This will make a little more sense. But again, these are the defaults for the auto sending of the statements and invoices. Second is workstation. So again, you can turn on each of the different, or you can make as many sections as you want to. That view doesn't dictate that. So if you want to have molecular biology together, sure, it doesn't matter to us. And each section then can be broken down into workstations. So the way there's kind of three layers of grouping for test offerings. So when you're talking about what test you offer, a test belongs to a workstation, which belongs to a section, which belongs to a lab. So there's kind of three layers there. And that really comes into play when you're doing your test search, when the users in the lab are trying to find and identify tests that they need to work on, then they'll see in their filter over here, that's that hierarchy. There's the lab that's doing the work. What section is it? Inside the section, you can break it up. So maybe in bacteriology, you break it up based on aerobic, anaerobic. Again, these are all definable. Your lab can decide how much division do you want in the different sections, in the different workstations. And again, every test belongs to a workstation. So it kind of works up the tree there. Again, allowing you to, again, just find things easily, grouping them up by the different disciplines or groups or work flows in your lab. There's also, this will help with when you're looking at the financial picture. If you want to say, well, I want to know what my income was, say by bacteriology, you can then see that income data also broken down by section and workstation. This also may come into play when you think about like when it comes to inventory management, when it comes to financial management, and also just test work management. You can divide that down into any as many sections, as many workstations as you want. Inventory, as I mentioned before, is also controlled at the section level. So you can turn on the inventory or turn off the inventory, and it'll hide or show the different options there. On the report, you can also have a header or footer that envelopes that section of the report. So the VetView Accession report is grouped by section, not by workstation, but by section. Workstation would seem to be too far down the tree to really be useful. So we just do it at the section level. So we keep all the bacteriology together, all the serology together. There's a little header on the report that says this is the serology test. But you can add more than just a name. You can also add a header and footer if you want to. They're rich text, so you can add different bolding, italicized, things like that, if you want to there as part of the session header, or the section header on the session report. Sites and users. So this is going back into if you are using multiple labs and or sites. So the concept of a site is this is a feature we added for a school that had multiple satellites or different sub labs or that were throughout their state. You know, they had the main lab or a primary lab in one area, and then they had two or three different satellites that did certain testing. Some of the tests can be used in both, but there's a shared client base, but yet there's a geographical site difference that they wanted to be able to control or be able to know which is where the accession was received at. Was it received in my southern lab or my eastern lab or the main lab or however you want to break that up? So you can define as many sites as you want. Now, the main difference between a lab and a site, again, as I was mentioning before, a lab is different client base. So it's each lab has its own set of clients, own set of invoicing and accounting. The site is a shared client base. So you can have as many sites as you want. Single invoice will come out at the end of the month, single accounting process. You'll find the same clients in any of the sites that you have here will all find the same clients when you're creating the accession in the system. But the lab, the users are associated at the site level. There's always going to be at least one site, even if you don't use the concept, there's always going to be one site, the primary site there. And that's how we control access. If you are using multiple sites and or multiple labs, you can dictate which user goes to each of the different ones. And that makes the session either visible or not visible to them when they search for it, try to go into it. If they don't have access or not signed to that lab, they don't see it. You can also change the prefixes and stuff at the site level as well. A couple other defaults there that you can do as on the same thing at the site level. So there's another option there if you need to break it up based on geographic or based on accounting financial, you can do that. Um, not going to really talk about requests. We'll talk about this tab when we get in that section of accepting things electronically. This is a section where you can have mapping between those clients. Priority and session fees. Priority fees. So VetView supports priority concepts. So stats as needed, as soon as possible. You can define as many or a few of these as you want. So if you don't really support that, just have one. You're great. If you want to, and you can use it for other reasons. You don't have to use it just for rush or not rush. It can be like this case, it might be a BSE. It used to be a special workflow that we had to do. had some things that went around that, you can do that. You do set one as the default so that when you're building it, it knows what to start with. But part of that, you can also build in a session charges based on the priority. So maybe the routine has a basic accession fee if you want one of those. Maybe if it's stat, you can have an upcharge for there. You can have as many charges associated per one of these priorities as well. So it's both a way to mark up things for rushing it, or again, maybe it's a certain legal program or regulatory program that has more overhead you want to tack on, you can do that. Or maybe it's internal research and you don't want to charge anything. You can do that as well. There's also a concept of a session fee, which is not priority based. It's just every session gets this fee. You can do that as well. So if you want to tack on a flat fee for every session, you can do that. You can select the product and product base it, things like that. If you're using the hospital, you can exempt them or not. We're not really doing that for since you're not using hospitals. But again, we support that priority and potentially fees against the priorities as well. I'm going to cover these real quick here. So question answers. Um, so questions in VetView is what we call kind of like epi data, some people call it. It's information that's coming in from the submitter. So a result is something we're generating in the lab. A question is something we're collecting at the beginning as far as information about the submission. So you can have questions at the accession level, so like histories or comments. You can put them at the accession level. You can have them print on. You can make them required. So if you wanted to do a history type question. You could do that, and then you can say, I want that to print on the report. I want to regurgitate it back out to the client. You can do that. You can also make it required. So if your session staff is filling it out, they can't skip it when they're filling it out. You can also make it required on the portal or the request coming in electronically, but maybe it's not required internally. So we did separate that out from what's coming in electronically versus what's being hand entered in the lab. But you can ask questions at the accession level. You can do it at the patient level, and you can make it species specific if you want to. So maybe if you do get a poultry, you want to ask them some other question, you can do that. You can do questions at specimen level, and you can even tie that to a given specimen type. So you can do all specimens, or just if it's some special type of specimen, you can have an additional question pop up on that as well. So lots of options there when it comes around specimens, patients, questions. Again, questions are more for collecting information about the case. Results are more about what you generate inside the lab. Printers, we also have support what we call network printers. And these will be printers that need to be associated to the web server itself. But if you do set these up, then it gives you big buttons inside of VetView that you can say, send this to the label printer over there in the corner, or I'm going to print it out on the office printer in the sessioning area, things like that. We do separate what we call regular printers. That's 8.5 by 11 type paper versus label printers, which are separate. Now they're all red because I'm in a test environment, and those printers are not actually associated to my test environment. So red meaning that they don't actually find them. This list is what they actually see in my test environment here. But it's more of a one-time setup. So as your IT professionals set these printers up on the server, they become visible in the list. You can then pull them over and make them available either as a label printer or as a regular paper printer in the system. And then VetView will show you those buttons in different places based on what you're printing. You can also have what we call event-based printing. So if you wanted to automatically spit out labels every time you release in a session, you can have that do that. You can say, I want to print, I want to print a report or a print, and it doesn't have to be just labels. It could be maybe you want to print a worksheet out or something else like that. So you can set up these event triggers for printing in the system. And that's really about it. I don't need to worry about document structure. That's for attaching stuff. You can define little folders inside that view for that. So again, a lot of information there. Just tried to hit the highlights of it. Try to give you a feel for what you're seeing here. Again, there's a lot to that there. So the last section I'll do here, again, there's so much here. I'm just trying to hit the highlights for us here. But the next thing I'll go into is this we call advanced configuration. Now talking about some of the jobs and interfaces, how to manage your reports, what some of the system options are there as well. So again, going back to my little thing here. So this is the report setup we'll touch on the oh, I forgot, interface and jobs, which is over here, and then reports themselves. So first, let's go into report setup or the jobs and interfaces. So jobs and interfaces are all the things that happen on a timer. Right. So if let's say, for instance, every night at midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, we have a job that runs and refreshes all of our views when it comes to in some of our search screens. It uses these views, we call them, to make data more efficient. It refreshes them every night, or maybe updating the client accounting balances every night. So every night it ages everybody's invoices one more day. But this is also used for, say, your instrumentation or, say, na the noun interfaces, where these jobs run in the background that will then communicate to the outside world, whatever, whichever way you're going. It could be, again, data innovations is one of the common ones that we use for some of the, like the analyzers, the chemistry analyzers, some of the bacteriology, things like that go through data innovations. Some of them may be actual external entities like Global Vet Link or the Noun Project. Some of the interfaces, one of the directions we're going down the path of is building more interfaces directly in that view. So we talk directly to equipment versus going through the data innovations, which is more like a broker that talks to different equipment through its system. The way this works is across the top, VetView is designed to run on multiple servers to spread out the load to make it scalable, right? So typical labs have at least two servers, one or two servers that the users in the lab interact with. That's what they're logging into. And there's a lot of times it's very invisible to the user, which one are you connected to, but there's potentially multiple servers there. One of them needs to be dedicated or design or at least flagged as being the server that's going to run the jobs because we don't want the jobs running multiple times in the background. We wouldn't want if you have three servers for whatever reason, we don't want the same job running three times. So this is just a list of all the servers that have checked in the last 24 hours, and we'll kind of build a list out of it. And then on the actual job itself, you say, well, what server is it running on? Again, let me jump over to a real system where it maybe makes a little more sense here. So let me jump on this list real quick. So for instance, again, y'all know we work very closely with the University of Georgia. They have 5 servers running their infrastructure. Now they're hospital and lab, so you may not need as many as them, but they've got 5 different servers that run. They got 4 what we call workers. This is what the clients log into, and they're all in a kind of load balancer. Again, the individual user doesn't know which one they're logged into. It shows on the footer which one you're connected to, but again, not necessary for you to know that. But then they have one server dedicated to run all the jobs and interfaces in the background. We call it the API server. And so in each of the definitions here, we say which server is running this job because again, we don't want to duplicate that effort. So that's what that's kind of showing you there. To add or subtract any of these jobs, there's a little add interface button up here. And so working with your IT professionals, as you set up some interface there, you can click on the add button and you'll see a list of all the different jobs that we have pre-configured that you can do. There's a bunch of hospital ones down here towards the bottom. You'll find the lab ones here. Those should be hidden since you're lab only, but you'll have the different ones that you can do here. Some of them are EPO systems, some are financial systems, but they have things like Biomic, the Cobas, and you're going to see more and more of these instruments start popping up as being direct connects versus going through, say, data innovations. Now, some of them may not show up in the list because they may have already been added. So data innovations is not on this list, for example, because it's already been added, and you can only add it once. But again, you just pick whichever one you want to configure. So let's say I was setting up the Biomic here. I would just pick it, open it up, and then it's going to go into like a detail page where you would then activate it. Do you want it to auto start? Typically, you would want it to auto restart itself. How often does it run? It's everything has to run on a timer because you can't just have real time in some of these interfaces. So again, based on how often, how fast you need it to be, you could say, well, I'll only run it every 10 minutes, or you could say, no, I want to run it every second. I want it to be super fast. But just know there's a trade-off. The faster you run your interface, the busier your interface is going to be. and may not be necessary. So you can set some of the details there. Each interface may have more or less to set up in it. And so that's why each one of these, when you go into it, you can it'll show you what your setup options are, what's required or not. But then a lot of these also have the ability to then have logs so you can kind of monitor the traffic between those different interfaces. And so this whole section is all about setting up all the different entities you're talking to, internally or externally. How do you communicate to them? How often do you send information? Some of these are incoming interfaces as well. So you may have incoming port information, it's called. It's actually coming into us. So we need to open up a listener to listen for information coming in from that third-party system. And that's all controlled in this section here based on what your lab has, based on what its needs are, and then also how to manage kind of making sure it's working, seeing the logs as it moves around in the system. All right. Another big thing is the report setup itself. So reports. So when I say reports, it's a generic term. It's all of the different reports that are in the lab. Every report in VetView is editable. And so what we do is you'll find that we have what we call system reports. So system reports are what's shipped with VetView. So when we ship VetView to you, there is a default report for all the different categories, right? So there's a default specimen label, there's a default accession report, and you can see those. Now, in a system report, we don't let you actually edit or upload and change the system report because that's always got to exist. But if you wanted to say create a new accession label, something to stick on the paper or to flag on different things, you could come in here and say, I want to duplicate that and I want to make my own version of it. And so I'll say, okay, this is my special version, right? And you can download the existing, these are the template files. You can download that file, and there's a free tool that we give you access to. I'm sorry, I need to be on a different server. Um, uh, Sorry, I need to jump over to another system real quick. But there's a free tool that we can go to. So report setup here. Oh, not results setup, report setup. Uh, Try this on this one. Position labels. Duplicate. All right, save that. All right, and so try this again. So you can download the template file it's called, and there's a free tool. It's called Jaspersoft Studio. Well, actually, you have a license to it. So everybody has a VetView license, also gets a license to use the Jaspersoft Studio. They have a report editor that you can use, but there's also a Jaspersoft reports server that you can set up to help facilitate um, custom reports, dashboards, even that you can set up and use as well. You get a license to go along to use that product as well. Takes a second to load up here. But the JRXML file it's called, that's the template file. That's the file that actually has the what we're going to edit into it. The .jasper file is the one that you upload back into VetView that has the changes that you made to it or not. That's fine. All right. So here's my accession label that this is the VetView standard one that comes with VetView. It's not real fancy. It's just kind of a basic one to start from. And this just lets you can shove and push these things around, make them bigger, make them smaller. We give you all of our system reports come with a list of fields that are available by default. Now, we have different types in VetView. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail because it's a whole session of its own, but you can have what we call Java Bean versus SQL based. So Java Bean means you're using our pre-formatted data. You have to just select from what you see here, or you can switch it to SQL where you can write your own SQL statement, your own query, and then write your report based on your own query. So you can do it either way in the system. I'm just going to kind of take this basic one here. I'm gonna just delete a bunch of stuff off just so you can visually see the differences. I gotta go this way. Yeah. So maybe I want to put my barcode over here, put the session number. Oop, over here, something real basic. Here. There we go. Move that back over here. Something like that. Just something different. Save that. And then I can come back over here. I can upload my new one back in the system. Hmm, didn't hit the compile button. And now if I were to go to a session, search here. If I come up to the print labels, what I just modified was the session label so that there's the default one there, but you'll notice now my special one shows up as an alternate version of it. So when I print this, you can get the standard session label, that generic one in the system, or now I can say I want my special one I just built, where I move the barcode over, put the session over to the right, things like that. So you can, anything in VetView, every label, every report can be pushed and pulled like you saw there. You can add data, remove data, rearrange it. Again, it's something you want to work with your IT professional, someone who's used to doing kind of crystal reports or report editing. But it is a tool that we provide as part of the VetView license to do all those edits and modifications there in the report setup. And again, we can have a whole class on that. There's a lot to it if you want to get into it. But one of the other things I'll show you there is that, again, you can also add your own, we call local reports. So not only is there the preset ones that we have, like the session label, session report, things like that, but there's also a local reports option which allows you to just build a custom report completely it's not related to any screen potentially, but what you can do then is, associate here. Uh, you can either hang it on a screen, we call it, so you can actually add it to the session screen, add it to the client screen, things like that, or you can just have it be on the local report screen, which that's an option here, is that you can have what we call local reports, just a place to go find all of the reports you've built and you've added to VetView. There's a place to find those there. But the other thing you can do, going back to security, is you can actually tie that to one of those roles again. So you can make a role specifically to kind of, shield or hide things from people who may or may not need it. If it's like a financial report, maybe you don't want everybody to run it or get access to it. Or if you have, like, say, a section specific report, you can build those as well, kind of limiting visibility of those things by using security roles attached to that report. But you can also do things like allow network printing. If you're doing like a special specimen label, you can actually flag it to certain printers. Like if you only want a label to be printed on one printer because it's a special paper size or media size, you can do that. You can also define Excel template formatting because sometimes when you're printing it to PDF, you may want to make it pretty, but when you're printing it to Excel or exporting it to Excel, you just want the raw data. You may want to format those slightly different, things like that. There's a lot of different options you can do there around the report editing and report setup as well in the system. All right, let me jump back to my here. All right, the last thing I'll touch on is the system options. It's really quick. So there is a system options section here in there as well. The system option is for just very high level. This is important though when you're in a sandbox environment, you want to make sure that you either disable your email communication or at least put it in test mode. If you put it in test mode, then that means anything you send out, it's not going to send it to the email address that you've listed on the client. It's going to send it to this email address you've specified here. And that's so that if you want to, in your sandbox, you want to test out to make sure that everything's working properly, and you click on a client and hit the send button, you're not, oh crap, I send it to the wrong, I send it to the client. Now I got to call the client and say, please disregard. You can turn it in test mode and then actually just divert those emails to a given test email box in the system if you want to make sure that you can test that feature without it actually going out to real clients. You can also just send an email directly from VetView just to make sure your email service is working properly. There's other big things here. There's if you are using local passwords, kind of what's required or not there. It's where you upload your license, things like that. So just some general updates and options here. You can also, this little message you see across the top up here, you can add that in the system as a pop-up. You can also add what we call a widget. So if you have special information you want to show the clients, or sorry, your users when they log in, you can actually use this little section to give them notes. It's whatever day, it's a special day. Um, you can actually put that in there, again, rich text, bold it, save that. And so when you save it, what'll happen then is when they log in, it's on their homepage there. So you can, just little things like that. But that's the system options. It's important when it comes to making sandbox, especially if you're cloning production in a sandbox. Someone needs to go make sure they turn off the email system just to make sure it doesn't happen accidentally or also turn off your jobs. So again, if you're cloning systems out, make sure you're turning off your jobs and you're not sending out statements and invoices and or opening up ports and trying to run things in multiple places. So it's very important when you start looking at those things as well. All right, I'm going to stop for a second and take some questions if there are any questions, and then we'll jump into clients and portal management. All right, well, let's just jump right into it. So clients. As I mentioned earlier, clients are a generic term. Any entity, business, person you want to represent in the system, they are a client. Let's first go to client type setup here. In the client type setup, there's two things we have in the screen. It's the client type setup, which is the different buckets of people. As I mentioned earlier, you can have owners, clinics, RDVMs, growers, producers, farmers, researchers. You can any name you want to give them. Fully customizable. You don't need this many. If you only have two or three, great, that's fine. We can help you set that up, purge out anything in your migration you might not need or want. There's also a client identifier set up. So there's been a request over the years to have different identifiers at the client level. Things like maybe you have a university ID system that you need to associate to them because they're doing collection receiving. Maybe you want to collect other kind of like be PMI information. If you want to do socials for some reason. We have one lab overseas that wants to collect their passport numbers, things like that. So, for instance, if you were doing passport numbers for whatever reason, you can also not only turn it on and have it, but you can also say, well, I want to make this encrypted in the database, and I also check for duplicates. I want to make sure that I'm not duplicating the client, the same passport number on two different clients. And then also, do you want to allow them to actually take upload an image of that? You can kind of dictate what options are around that particular item. And then when you save that, what that does is then it shows up on the client setup screen we'll go to in a second. You'll see this will show up there. You can also dictate requirements in the sense that if you're going to be the bill party, it's required, or something like that. So you can turn on those requirements as well. Again, this is kind of built for that client that we have that needed this extra billing option there to collect some PMI information. We try to stay away from too much PMI because, again, the university doesn't allow us a lot of times to have that in the system, but it is encrypted in the database when you do that. Now, on the client itself, let's jump over to client management. So client management is over here. Sorry, I jumped around. Yep, clients here. Um, so in the client screen, so when you are setting up a client, and I'll just pick anybody here, doesn't really matter. So in the client, across the top here, we do this a lot. You'll see as we go through, is we have what we call like an index card at the top here, has an example of again, clients belong to labs. So which lab does that client belong to? Their name, address, phone numbers, and their current AR balance there in the system. If they have any alerts, the alerts are showing up here. Alerts is another thing that you can customize. So I was going to bring that up here. You can set up alerts in the system, and that's just a category of alert. You can still type a note in the alert, but if you want to have an alert for bad debt or whatever you want to call it, maybe you have a VIP client, whatever you want to call it there, you can say that's used for clients, and you can even upload your own special icon if you want to go that far. I will just grab something quickly here. Um, here we go. Let's just put a goofy symbol there. Sure. Save that. So you can have as many different alerts as you want, again, by types of alerts. So then again, when you're on your client screen, if you want to add an alert, you can do that and it'll show up at the top up here. So if I add my alert here, and I can now put my VIP alert and special client, save that. It'll automatically pop up. So across the top up there, I'm not sure why my icon didn't show up. That's okay. Um, you can have the alerts there. So let's kind of go through now setting up the client. So again, everything's in tabs here. So we have the top row tabs and the bottom one. So the first tab, talking about the client itself, it's all about defining the client settings. So there you have the details. So we support either, you can have name or business farm name. You can do either or here. The idea is that if they have a business farm name, that's what we're going to display as the primary name. If not, then it defaults back to the actual person's name. You can put IDs if you have any kind of national farm ID, state ID. You can see that passport number that I added over on the other screen is now here as well, where you can add those. So again, this is the basics, but this is where the client types come in. And you can actually have multiple client types against a given client. Again, it's only used for a bucketing or filtering mechanism. And where that shows up is that if I'm on the client search screen, and say I want to find somebody's name here, there may be a bunch of them in the system. So you can say, well, I only want to find the one that is the clinic or the owner, or maybe something like that. And you can use it to filter down what set are you looking through in the system versus looking through all of the different clients that may be in your system. Because there may be tons of owners, but only a few clinics and RDVMs, things like that. It also shows up when you're doing your session. So if I'm doing a new session here, again, those client types are something you set up ahead of time in the session setup on the lab setup screen. So now that becomes a filter here as well. So if I say I'm looking for the clinic, it now is only pulling out the ones that have Duke in the clinic name or in one of the names somewhere and showing it to me here at the clinic drop-down box. So again, it's just a filtering or categorizing of clients, but a client can be in more than one type. So if you have someone who's a owner doctor, you can actually have them be in both fields, if or in just one, or if they're a grower, producer, and an owner. You can use this however you want to group that and use that. It's not even required in VetView. It's required if you want them to be used in the filters, on the search screen or on the accession screen there. So that's the importance of the client types. Contact information. So contact information is all of the ways that you reach out to them, right? Phone numbers, and we have different ones here, home phone, work phone, cell phone, fax number, email address. There's also mailing, billing, shipping address that you can put in there. For each of the contacts that you have, like a home phone, cell phone, you can say, what are you sending to them? Now, we don't do it for just phone numbers, but if I added, say, a fax number or email address here, then I have the option to say, what do I want to send to this address? So if I put in my, email address in here, um, what am I getting here? Am I getting my session reports? Am I getting the sample receipt report, accounting report, or general communication flag? So you can dictate or you can set up as each client coming in the door. You can set that up if it's a bigger business and you have to separate a session reports from accounting. You can do that. You can have another email address specifically for just that. So maybe I have my accounting reports go to one email address, but then my session reports go to the other one. Again, you can kind of pick and choose which way you want to use that. Same thing with mailing addresses. You can have a session reports, or maybe just that's where your general communication goes to the mailing address, like a mailer. You want to set that up. You can do that as well in the system there. And then again, if you edit that, there's a little box that pops up depending on what you're editing in the system. If it's a phone number, it's just right here on the screen. Again, you can have as many of those as you want. It's not limited to just one email address or one phone number. You can have as much as you want. The primary flag is just a flag that you can set if there are more than one email address or more than one phone number. You can say, well, that's my primary number in case I'm trying to call them or contact them. Outside of this, I can, I know which one to call or which one to email if there is a primary one or not. Going back to Portal, so we also make it where it's hopefully easy for you to see if a client has a Portal account. So a couple things here. One is it notices that I put my email address and actually put my email address, and so there's a lot of them that I'm linked to or potentially already on. But let's say I had a different email address in the system. So if I went back here and I removed these, yep, remove that one, and maybe I'll change this to um, Bob and save that. Then I go to my portal. So Bob's not, he doesn't have a portal account yet. There's no other client with Bob at uga.edu in there. So again, it doesn't link or suggest anything to link them to, but you get a button here to quickly add them. So again, you can either have a client self-register, or maybe if they're talking to them in person or on the phone, you can say, well, let me just create you an account. It's just a one-click button there. It'll create their accounts using their email address as their username. You can send them the reset password button or email, which will automatically reset their password to a random generated password. Send them that email with their random, temporary password in it. You can also send them the welcome letter if you want to. Those things were pre-set up again on the lab setup screen. But if I click on the portal account here, which is now a link, a hyperlink that I can click on, now I can go in there and adjust anything I need to adjust for Bob's account. If I want to go ahead and set a known password, you could set that here if you wanted to. But this is also where you can dictate what can Bob do in the system. So first of all, this user information at the top here, Bob at uga.edu, this is how he logs into the portal itself. So this username and password is how he gets into the portal. This information down here, the linked clients, is how VetView knows what to show Bob. So what's going to happen since Bob is linked to this account, any session that was done where James Atkinson was associated to the session, then he would be able to see that session, view the report, print the report off potentially. Now, by default, it's all turned off. So you would need to come in here and say, yes, I want to allow Bob to view a session reports. Maybe I want to let them see the accounting, pay by credit card, and or even submit requests, through the portal. So you can, per client, dictate what it is that they can do in your portal in the system. But the other thing you can do is we try to make it more flexible in the sense that if you have, because we know that this happens, is that maybe you have um, one of the big conglomerates out there where they have multiple clinics, multiple doctors, multiple people. You can set up a single web portal account that maybe represents the clinic and then link them to all of the different doctors or link them to, the different people inside of VetView. So it's not a one-to-one, it's actually one-to-many here. I can actually put multiple um, different people on the same thing. So I can say I also want to find my test account. And this could be used, again, maybe useful for um, if you're building like a state vet and wants to see a lot of stuff, or maybe you have an industry, then you need to have someone who can, they want to be visible into the industry. You can have them, and maybe they only get viewing ability for that extra client that you give them. So you can say this, they can see all of the sessions from this account, but this one, maybe they can see sessions and accounting. So you can dictate that. So you can use that however that applies. You can also, for going back to like the state vet, if you do have like a state vet who needs to see everything or anything, then you can actually map them to the entire lab. You can just say this client can see every session that's coming through the vet view if you wanted to as an option. Probably not you're going to do that much, but you can do that if you wanted to. Again, if you notice that was by site, it's a small detail there. So again, maybe you only let them look at the aquatic cases, something on that order, or lab. Maybe you have a lab section that you want to let them look at there. Again, you can do all that in the portal. So going back to um, Bob's the account here that I did. So we'll actually just change this to Bob's now. This is Bob's account. Save that. So that's what the portal does. And again, that lets you see, does Bob have an account? Can I help them if they have a question online? Do I need to reset their password for them? Things like that. Again, you saw before, it also suggests if you have, again, by putting in an email address, it'll cross-reference and see if they've already got an account there. The billing tab is where you set up some of those things I was talking about before, where you can turn on auto invoicing, print the summary of charges on every accession report. Other things that you can turn on and off, you can exempt them from fees, exempt them from taxes. We support what we call normal clients and direct charge. Credit card on files is a flag. We don't actually store the credit card information unless you turned on that client identifier. But that's some labs support the ability to have like a credit card in a lockbox, and then at the end of the month, you auto bill their credit card. Again, just a flag there to help speed that process up. Typically, normal billing is your everyday client, and then direct charge would be your internal university clients, researchers or other departments inside your university where you allow them to do work and you're going to just bill their account directly. You're going to just transfer the money between the accounts and it not actually be a check or cash that's coming between accounts. We support that. That is seen as a payment type. So it's flagging the client is that they have a direct charge set up. You would put in their account number or speed code or whatever they might call it. You can even put an expiration date. If it was like a grant that runs out in a year, you could actually put an expiration date on it as well. Things like that that you can set up in the system. When we get into the accounting section, which is I think next week, we'll talk a little bit more about how that gets processed when it comes to building invoices and then collecting payments against it. You can also, as I mentioned before, these price sets, you can set them up however you want to use them in-state, out-state, researcher, employee, whatever you want to do there. But you can also, per client, even vary pricing at the client level. So if you have a researcher who's going to be doing 1,000 of these tests a month and you want to give them a price break, you could do that. You could pick the product. Let's say it's some PCR or something that they're going to be doing 100 of or thousands of or whatever, and you want to give it to them at a special rate of $10 or something like that. There's no volume discounts. And you see that. So what that means is that if they order this one test, they get it at this special rate. Everything else will be billed at the normal price. So the way we do it is like a failover system, and we'll talk about this in more detail on the accounting session next week. But that's just where you set that up and manage that. Not required that you do this. It's just, again, it's just for special billing purposes. Identifiers. So this identifier is slightly different than the ones we talked about before. The word identifier gets used a lot because that's just information we're trying to collect. This identifier is designed more for things like premise IDs. So again, if you have clients that have farms that have different premise IDs, you can preset those up or you can collect them at the time of accessioning. But this is where we can keep track of that. You can set it as maybe a default premise ID in the system, but you can link those ahead of time or like I said, in real time, you can build those out, things like that. Linking and mapping, it's more for just if you have clients that are associated to each other. Mapping is for the interface. Again, if we're accepting things through the portal or accepting them through an electronic messaging system, we have a place to see the mappings there as well. So little details there at the end. All right. The other tabs here are more working tabs in the sense that a sessions tab shows all of the sessions that this client has ever submitted. So let me go find a client that has more examples here. Let's go to companion. So this is a business now. I'm looking at a clinic, flagged as a clinic here. If I go to their sessions, you can see all the sessions that the client has either finalized or new. I can print that report quickly. So if I'm talking to the client on the phone and they are looking for a specific report, you could go here. If they don't remember the session number, or if they know the session number, you could look it up to the session screen, but you could print that report, look at it, either, tell them about it, whatever it is they need to do. But you can also see a list of all the stuff that they've got going on there as well. Yeah, the bigger case. And then the next one over is by patient. This one I don't feel is as useful, but we wanted to give you that ability here. If you needed to, wanted to see all the different animals that were submitted under that session, all of these sessions, you could view that here. The accounting is here as well. So if you want to see the running balance, invoices, payment statements here, if you want to print and regenerate those, you can print and regenerate them. You can also print an actual AR history for a given length of time. So if you want to say, give me everything from the past year, including invoices or including any pending things, you can do that as well. Give them a summary of their information. The current charge tab is showing is things that have not been invoiced yet. There are things pending up, waiting to be invoiced. So if you have invoice per session on, this will primarily be empty unless it's still working. If you have monthly invoicing on, then you'll see all the sessions queuing up, waiting for the next invoice to be generated. You can generate an invoice from here as well. If you just need to, for some reason, go ahead and generate the invoice for the client. They want an invoice today, you could do that as well. This is also where you can add miscellaneous charges, either to a given a session. So I can come into this session, I can add charges here. I can even update or modify the charges on a given session as well from here. So you can modify those things, add additional those options as well in the system. There's also just a miscellaneous charge tab as well. This would be if you're just selling the client, formalin jars or containers or whatever, you can add miscellaneous charges to the client. The next time the invoicing cycle runs, these will get picked up and invoiced as well to that client at the same time. So this is the accounting tab, has all the information on here. We do have also on the first tab a payment form. So if you are taking a payment from a client, maybe they walked in the front door, you need to collect their money, you could come to the client record, pull up the client, and go ahead and collect that payment here. There's also a button that would let you jump out to a third-party payment system if they want to pay by credit card, something like that as well. But that payment form is here, and this is really useful for, especially for people like accession receiving people who don't need the full accounting screen where you would do a lot of that work, but you want to give them the power to collect a payment, again, for the walk-in or for the miscellaneous times when something comes up where they need to process a payment. It's only payments, it's not adjustments to any additional AR stuff in the system. You saw me do the clients and alerts here. So the clients, this comments and alerts section here, um, not only does it have a place to put in all of the different alerts like you saw me do earlier, but we also, everything that leaves VetView as an email or a fax, we capture it in their history here. And we also have a link to the actual file. So every statement that goes out, every accession report goes out. Again, we keep a copy of that file as it was sent so that you can see when you sent it, who you sent it to, and you actually have a copy of exactly what they received on that day or should have received. So again, if there's questions or you need to look back, or if they're claiming they're not getting it, maybe you can look here to see, oh, maybe we have a typo in the email address or something, other reason why they didn't get it, or did they get it and they just didn't know it or didn't remember it. You have that log here to kind of show that and prove it. You can also write just general comments. It doesn't always have to be an alert. If you had a conversation with the whatever, you can type that in here as well. Dot dot dot. Oops, spell right. Conversation. You can fill that in, save that, and document that in the system as well. It's going to track who did it, when did they do it, things like that as well in the system. You can also then see those documents. Again, everything sent out of that view is captured. So just another way to view that. This is just a list of all the files. You can also attach other miscellaneous things as you want as well. You can do that and attach those pictures, PDFs, whatever it is that you need to capture as well. You can attach that to the client's record here too. So you got a full list of stuff that you can do as far as managing the client's details, contact information, billing information, portal, see the current work, see the things you've billed for, write notes, comments, and other attachments. As I showed before, I kind of bounced over and talked about the portal, but the portal management is very similar. As you saw, you can access it from the client because it has to be linked to a client to give them access. But there is a portal management screen itself. It's going to a search screen. You can then see all those in there. You can find the new requests. What the new requests are is if someone self-registers for an account, it will send an email to someone inside the lab and say, hey, Dr. Smith or Joe Smith or whoever it is, Miss Smith just signed up for an account, because again, they're not going to get immediate access. If they self-register through the portal, we don't give them immediate access to anything because somebody needs to vet which client are you associating to, what should be visible to them or not. So it'll send an email, and then you could come in here and find them by just using, new request, or if you know the name of who it was, you could then find those people. And then once you find them, you could then activate them. Looks like it's just gibberish in my test system. But then you could set up, add more information, link them to a client, and then send them the welcome email. Because that's what happens as well. Is if I come in here and I add in somebody else here, let's look at test accounts, lab, save. No, sorry, client type. Oh, sorry, I took that. Sorry, 18. Yep. You can click on the little email here, and it's not configured, but once you configure your email, that would send them the welcome email. So you can come in here, fill out the rest of the information, send them the welcome email which maybe has details about, information of how to use the portal, other things like that. So again, if they self-register, they don't get direct access. Someone internally has to manage and grant that access to them. All right. I know I went fast. There's just a lot to cover. Is there any questions that I can answer for today's session? All right. I appreciate your time. We will be putting this up on our wiki for anybody who needs to review it or wants to review it at any point, or if you need to give it to someone else to view that was not able to attend today. We'll be putting this up as quickly as we can. So thank you again for your time. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.